Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Today we're going to be looking at our Microsoft 365 based AP Invoice Automation product, but specifically how you could use Power BI reporting in conjunction with the application. So it looks like we're right about at the top of the hour, so we should probably go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to go through. Quick introduction of who DynamicPoint is. So DynamicPoint has been around since 2009, as you can see here, so almost 15 years. And all of our apps are built on this Office 365 framework. So the product that I'm going to show you today, our AP Invoice Automation, is 100% based on our Office 365 framework. As you can see here, we have a little bit of history that predates us. We used to build custom applications as well as on-premise back in the day, but now all of our apps are Office 365 add-ons. So enough about us. Let's go ahead and look at our product portfolio. We have 3 applications that we feature. We're going to ignore 2 of them. We're going to ignore this portal product for the sake of today, as well as our employee expense management, and we're going to focus on this guy right here, our AP Invoice Automation application by the name of Easy AP 365. The real objective of this product is to take everything from the point of invoice receipt, workflow, OCR, AP management, to the point where this invoice is ready to be integrated with the underlying ERP system. So I like to say it's sort of everything that needs to occur before an invoice is ready to be entered into your ERP application. That's what this product is going to automate. So that's an introduction to the application. The steps that I'm going to walk you through today, and we're briefly just looking at this to sort of set the framework, but the focus of today is going to be, after we get through all this, is how we could use Power BI reporting in conjunction with the application. But in order to set that up, we at least have to walk through an invoice here. So 3 major steps that we want to walk through. First is this invoice receipt. We'll call this step 1 right here. And what ultimately that means for our product is an invoice is going to come into this SharePoint library. And Microsoft provides us all kinds of flexibility of how we could get an invoice into a library. It could come via email directly from the vendor. We could have an employee check request. We could have mobile upload. We could give our vendors a portal. We could drag and drop. We could upload it from Teams. The list goes on. Scan it, of course. But anyway, ultimately, all of those invoices are going to fall directly in this library. And for the sake of simplicity today, we'll just focus on this first one, an email entry directly from the vendor. After that email is received, we're going to bring this into our application and we're going to process this. So this step 2 is the bulk of the heavy lifting. This is where the invoice comes into our product. This is where we're going to do such things as assign templates and GL accounts, as well as other financial dimensions. And this is where we're going to kick off the Power Automate approval workflow on it. So after the invoices come in, it's been processed, after workflow is complete, the third and final step is to bring this invoice into our accounting system ready to be posted and paid. And we integrate with many different ERP applications. So this is quite a list which is available, quite a long list which is available on our website, but we're not going to cover that today. We're going to set this up, we're going to process an invoice pretty quickly, and then we're going to quickly switch to how we could use Power BI in conjunction with all of this to begin doing analytics and KPIs with all the information we've gathered. So with no further ado, I'm going to switch it over and let's get to the demo. All right, so let's go over to our AP automation product. So this is, again, it's a SharePoint-based application. So the product is installed on top of SharePoint, and this is the AP processing dashboard. So I have different calls to action here. I could look at my processing queue, various reports I could click on, look at my incoming invoices. Here I have a sample Power BI report just showing a summary of what's in the system and unapproved invoices by vendor total as well as an aging. And what I want to start off first with is submitting an invoice. So I'm going to pretend to be a vendor and open up my email. And this vendor here is just going to send us a new invoice. And this invoice is going to go to a shared AP processing inbox. So it's represented by ap@dynamicpoint.com. In my example, here's the invoice that I'll be submitting. Looks something like that. And we're going to go ahead and finish our vendor duties and hit send. And what that's going to do is receive that invoice, process OCR in it, and it's going to bring it into this invoice processing queue. So we see all these invoices coming into the application, as well as we've defaulted and assigned some accounts, as well as additional financial dimensions based off of some templates and some logic that we have built into the application. In addition, I see we have the invoice here. So that little link right here will show me the actual invoice. I can see all of the results of OCR have been populated, right? So we have the amount, the date, the vendor, etc. This one happens to already be submitted for under review. The one I just submitted, I can see it's right here. It's not been submitted, and it can be, right? So at this point, I'm going to review this invoice, say that it looks good, and I'm going to go ahead and kick off the workflow process on it. The workflow process will generate approval actions that are going to be managed by Power Automate, Microsoft's workflow workbench. So the invoice has come in, now I have to approve it. So I'm going to pretend to be a manager here. Go to my email. If you could see here, I've received this approval action as well as a copy of the invoice. So it's been sent to a manager so they could review the invoice. And then they could actually approve or reject it directly from this email. By the way, these approval actions, you don't have to manage them from email. If I'd prefer to use something like Teams, if I go to Teams, go to my Teams site here, I'll go to my approval app, and then you'll actually see the same list, all the actions that have been assigned to me, and I could approve or reject it directly from this list as well. But let's go ahead and do it from email. So I can say this looks good. And submit it. That will move the workflow forward. My workflow is pretty simple for the sake of today. It's just a two-tiered approval. I'm sorry, a single-tiered approval, not even a two-tiered approval. So just one tier and that invoice is approved. I'm going to go ahead and receive a notification here that that invoice has been processed. And if I go back to my AP Automation tool, do a quick refresh, we'll see my invoice has now disappeared, and it really hasn't gone anywhere. It's just being filtered out. So if I clear to filter, you'll see this submitted status on this invoice. And what this means is this invoice has gone through the workflow process and has now been integrated with the ERP. So if I click through a few tabs here, I'll see the notes. So these are all of the notes of the workflow actions and who got assigned to what, whether or not they approved or rejected it, etc. I'll see the notes tab here of all the review notes that were entered during the review process. And then the last thing here is the ERP details. So this is the transaction that just got created in the underlying ERP. In this case, that happened to be integrated with Business Central, but again, we have a long list of applications or ERP applications that we integrate with. So that was really all I wanted to go through from the application today. So we covered the submission of an invoice coming in via email. We did a quick review of it. We submitted it for workflow. It went through an approval process, one tiered approval, and then upon the final approval, we've gone and integrated that invoice with the ERP application ready for payment. But now we want to go ahead and shift to the reporting elements. So before I shift to the nitty-gritty of reporting, we should talk about where all that data is stored. So we captured an invoice, we submitted it for review. We captured such things as notes and audits. If you recall from looking at these particular invoices, if I go ahead and clear my filter again, we're capturing all kinds of data about invoices, right? The ERP that we've integrated with, permissions assigned to them, audit logs, notes, maybe user-defined fields and additional details, etc. The nice thing about using this Office 365 framework is we're not actually storing any of this data. All of this data is staying within your Office 365 tenant. And if I were to go back to my dashboard here and click on a Power Query report, or actually we could just show you the invoice list. This won't be pretty, but this will show you where all of, or a lot of this data is stored, right? It's all being stored in SharePoint. And this is more raw, but if I look at something like a Power Query report, this will begin looking a little bit more useful and more pretty. As you can see, here's all the invoices in the system integrated with Excel. And I could filter these, look at different statuses, etc., right? So I can interact with these. See everyone's or just mine. I happen to be an admin, so I have this right, of course. So as you can see, I could begin interacting with this data using Excel, or sometimes known as Power Query, because I'm using the Power Query technology to hook up in a real-time fashion to a SharePoint list. So that's one method. The other method is I could begin looking at this more from an analytic perspective using more formatted reports. And that's really where Power BI is going to come into play. Power Query is great for more Excel type interfaces, but if I want to look at things more in an aggregate or at a summary level, Power BI is going to give me that technology. So let's look at this first report of an open task report. So here I have all of the open tasks that are applicable to this AP invoice automation process. So you can see I have 330 pending, 4 requesters, 7 approvers, etc. And each of these is giving me a detail of who requested this, who submitted this invoice, who's the approver assigned, the title of the report, some additional details, as well as a hyperlink directly to that report itself. So each of these I could go in and click on this, and it'll go ahead and open up that review page directly. So you can see here I have this review page. I could again look at the invoice, any supporting attachments associated to it, etc. Other things I could do with this report is I could filter just based on the requested by, so who are the persons who submitted these in the application. I could search on the title, search on approval details, etc. Like any Power BI report, I have the ability to export this or analyze it in Excel or other formats, as you can see. So there's a lot of different options. So this report is basically answering the question of who are these approval actions assigned to, and who needs to take action on these to keep these invoices moving into the system. And just to have a quick visual that accompanies this, so we go over and I could open up a slide really quick. So basically the way you look at this is, again, the data is coming from SharePoint, and then a lot of what's being managed from an approval action is being stored in either the Dataverse or Microsoft Azure. This is all Microsoft's framework for those approval actions. And we could use Power BI to bring it all together. And that open task report was a perfect example. So it's drawing from these different data sources, various locations of different Microsoft technology, and we're pulling that together into a usable format. So the first one I showed you was Excel. The second one was a basic Power BI report, but let's move forward to a little bit more advanced Power BI report. So I'm going to go ahead and again go back to my dashboard, and I'm going to open up my EasyAP dashboard report that's going to show me everything across all invoices in the system. The other nice thing to know about these reports is they are user specific. So my permissions are being applied as far as which invoices I have the ability to see. Okay, so here I have an ability to define a create date, and I could obviously scroll this and say, hey, what type of invoices do I want to analyze in the system? I could look at it based off specific vendors, right? So maybe I'm just interested in picking a DynamicPoint demo vendor, and then as you can see, the report refreshes immediately for all that. Blank. I'll unselect that and go back. Maybe I just want to look at invoices in a given status, those that are under review or rejected. Last person assigned, who is the person that is still waiting on this to review, and what does that represent from a total dollar amount, as well as different invoice types, PO, non-PO, etc. So if I go through each of these sections of this report here, you're going to see the total number of transactions, the year to date, and whether or not that's increased or decreased based on the previous quarter. The amount, again, the analysis versus year to date, and again, bringing in the previous quarter and whether or not I've seen an increase or a decrease. Average processing days for each invoice. So what this is looking at is from the date or the time that it was submitted, how long is it taking me to get it through the system. Outstanding transactions as well as volume. And then here we get into some of the workflow, the pending transactions by user. You can see my SharePoint user here is by all means the most delinquent. Transaction volume by vendor, right? So who are my vendors that are giving us the most invoices, as well as a total here in volume. And again, you can see the value in the various statuses. So this is looking at each status on the invoice and how much it represents as a percentage of the total invoices that are in the ECAP application. You could also see a transactions processed, a total volume and a value associated to that, and then a chart here with transactions processed over time. I should mention each of these little sections here has your standard Office 365 Power BI controls, right? So I could drill up, I could drill down, I could go into focus mode and just look at that specific section, right? I could return back to report. So all of that applies. If I want to drill into any of these, all of those controls apply to each section. So I could just look at one area of the report and make that my focus. Okay, so here we have an aging bucket. Aging bucket is not your traditional aging bucket as far as what are the terms on the vendor. This is looking at it from a workflow perspective. In other words, what is the aging based off of the value or where it's been in the workflow process. And that's an important note to make about all these reports. These are not intended to take over your ERP reporting functionality. We're not looking at things from a general ledger or a vendor summary or anything like that. We're really just looking at the AP transactions that are in the automation workflow. So again, that's everything from the approval process to it being submitted. We're really looking at sort of the precursor to what would ultimately be an AP module in a standard ERP application where we're going to do our aging, where we're going to do our vendor analysis and things like that. None of this is intended to replace this. This is just additional information focusing on the processes that occur before the ERP. If I go into here, I actually see the specific transactions that are going to make up those values that I'm looking at. Again, I could click on any of these and you could see all of my reports are being updated based on my selection. If I'd like to bring this into focus, I could click the focus mode and look at all that raw data, the buckets, the invoice amount, etc. So this is all the information that is ultimately being compiled into these visual effects. I'm sorry, these various visual effects. So that shows you some of the capability of using Power BI now that all of my data is stored within my Microsoft tenant. You can see that's a pretty powerful report, right? And again, the other beauty about this report is it's just a template. With our AP Automation product, this gets deployed to your environment. So if there's anything that you want to change with this or customize, it is absolutely, non-proprietary technology to us. It's being provided by your Office 365 subscription, so you could edit it and change it however you want. So that was it as far as our demo is concerned. So I'm going to go ahead and shift it back to our PowerPoint here. Believe it or not, looks like we got through this pretty quickly. But thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully that gives you some food for thought on how you could use Power BI to report on this invoice data that resides within the DynamicPoint EasyAP 365 application. Thanks again for joining, and I'll give you a few minutes back to your day and have a great one. Thank you so much.